There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioners' future. This is just one of them. Well, hello. How the devil are you? That was a bit strange, wasn't it? Anyway, how are you doing? It's episode 24, and we are, of course, dialing into the future of work, as we inevitably do. Hope you're having a good time. It seems to be a bit weird out there. Big day today, things happening in Scotland. We'll watch those closely. Actually, talking of politics, which we were, it's a really interesting time of year. It is that time of year when everybody trots out and we are into conference season. And conference season, you'll know, is when all of our parties here in the UK get to lay out their strategies for how they're going to deal with the road ahead. And what you'll find in all of those strategies, buried normally on page like 57, is a digital strategy. So this is what we're going to do. Now, interestingly, this year, it hasn't been buried on page 57. It's been upfront and personal. Now, look, we're still working on getting hold of the digital strategies from Conservatives and Labour. But the point for me is that we're at such a crucial point in our society that I'm not sure we've really grasp the scale of the kind of problem that we should be dealing with. Let me give you a couple of examples. Now, look, in terms of disclaimers, we are completely apolitical. I don't care, more or less, who is we can help do this. Not you, Farage, not you. Anybody else. If we can help you deliver a digital strategy that enables the UK to take up its rightful place, leading, certainly the economy in terms of what we can do with digital, what we can do for society, what we can do for our citizens, then I'm up for that. So I'm up for anybody who wants to come on that journey, and I know Gary is too. But here's the challenge. Let me lay out a couple of things. So we're in Exeter. This is, a couple of weeks ago, and Boris is doing his thing, right? And he's laying bricks. Now, my problem of this, and look, we will be balanced about this, is Boris is laying bricks. Now, let me introduce you to another bricklayer. This is a bricklayer called Sam. And Sam lays bricks at 3 times the speed, not just of Boris, but a proper good bricklayer. In my view, what Boris should be doing, and I get why he's there, and he's showing that we've got to build back better and that builders are an important part of the economy. And of course, and I'm not saying that they're not, but I'm saying that the builders of the future, the bricklayers of the future, will be the ones that can work in harmony with Sam. How do you think Sam gets his bricks? Who do you think sets Sam up? Where are we training the bricklayers of the future to be able to harness the power of the machine in order to be able to do things more effectively and more efficiently? It doesn't replace the human. It gives us the opportunity. So to me, what we should be doing is presenting this as our way of moving forward. So taking that long-term future progression. And before you get upset with me, let's talk about the Labour Party. And the Labour Party have a consultation out right now for our digital future. And it's based on their digital strategy. And it asks a number of key questions. There are 5 themes. And crucially, it's positioned by digital's quite important to us, but we need to get it right. And it talks about, we'd like to hear from you on these 5 things. My problem, and I understand why this has happened, but again, it shows you the scale of the problem. And if I just flip to the document. So we have some really, really important words about digital. We heard about digital technology contributes 149 billion to our economy, employs nearly 3 million people, blah, 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 blah. And then we go straight to a letter, and it's a really important letter, and it's a really tragic story, and it's from Ian Russell, who is the father of Molly, who took her own life as a result of seeing harmful online content. And there is the Molly Rose Foundation, which is all about making sure that we are accountable for the kind of content that our kids get to see. Now, I'm not trying to marginalise how important this issue is, but if you think about what the tone of what this does by putting this right at the beginning of that document, it says this stuff is scary, this stuff is dangerous to us, what are we going to do to protect ourselves? I get that message is important, but what if instead of doing that we took an opportunity, which is to think about what is the world that we could have if we got this right, if we put all of this stuff together, if we connect the dots, what is the world that is available to us? Now, curiously, if you look at many different government reports, many of which have come out over the last 6 months, some of which were certainly in the last 12 months, you will find a golden thread. And the golden thread is digital. And the golden thread will tell you things like for every pound we invest in our digital economy, we will see £10 in return. And the £10 comes from things like skills and employment. £10 things comes in changing the way that we consume public services. But 1 to 10, not bad. We also know that 80% of the roles in the next 10 years will require digital skills. We know that the ability to supply digital skills for those roles will be fundamental, not just for our economy, but for the well-being of our citizens. So time and time again, you can see this thread being laid out, but nobody is connecting those dots. And with that, I'm going to bring Gary in, and I want to start this sort of conversation, because the conversation is, it's going to take people who think really broadly about the opportunity in order for us to build our national digital strategy. And again, I don't care who's building it, right? We'll help you. We want to help you. We want to make it happen. But unless we take that sort of holistic view, my final sort of thing, and then I'll open it up to Gary, is the analogy that I've been sort of kicking around, I was just walking the dogs and thinking about it, is it's like we were working on a jigsaw puzzle before the pandemic started. And when the pandemic started, in our surprise, we got up and we knocked the table over. We've put the table back, and there was all these pieces, and we're picking them up and we're trying to put them back to where they were, not realizing that we're working on an entirely different puzzle now. And so my proposal to the floor is that unless we fundamentally understand which are the core building blocks of where we're going, not where we've been, we will never be able to build back the puzzle which represents our economy and our society going forward. So Gary, that's my opening gambit for, if we want to build a national digital strategy, that we have to start by connecting the opportunity. How do we do that?
So this is the sort of stuff we used to do. And, you know, Labour Party, great that you're doing a consultation. Maybe you wanted to start with all the stuff that's been written over the last 30 years that hasn't been done, including whilst you're in government. So there's a huge amount of stuff out there. There isn't a shortage of stuff to do. I'm not criticising the Labour Party. And, you know, we said we're apolitical. We dislike most politicians and parties. But I think the point here is there isn't a lack of things that can be done. What we need to do is take what's been done and start to evolve that. But I felt really uncomfortable reading the same when I got to the first page as you, because don't get me wrong, we love technology, but actually, technologists are some of the most vocal and critical people. If you can see people from Facebook, from Google, from Amazon criticizing some of their policies, there isn't a lack of morals in technologists as a whole. So, it's not needed. They are balancing this. And I think that let's answer the question. The starting point needs to be, look at what's possible. It is as simple as this. Look at what's possible and decide and prioritize where you want to go. What is it you want to do as a society? These are big, bold questions. But unless you start asking those and coming up with some ideas and some prioritization, nothing else is going to happen below that, because you're always going to have more things to do than you've got the money for.
But nobody's curating that vision. This is my challenge, right? And the thing is, none of the technology companies are going to do it, because they're going to sit there and say, well, hang on a minute, I'd quite like to sell some stuff to them, so I'll give you my view from how much I can sell you. The politicians certainly aren't going to do it, because they're politicians. They haven't spent a life in the tech industry like we have. They've sort of worked across lots of different sectors. And so actually the danger is, unless we can pull this vision together, nobody really understands. It's a bit like, I remember a time when certain people from the UK government would come to see me in my role at Microsoft and say, look, we're trying to understand what's the future provision of broadband that the UK is going to need. And they would almost, not literally, but they would get out a notebook and how much copper are we going to need? How many gigabits could I get for that? And it's just like, well, hang on a minute. You tell me what bloody society you want. How do you want things to work? What opportunities do you want for our citizens? What prospects do you want? And not for the next 4 years, but for the next 10 years. Then we can start having a conversation about what kind of broadband we need. And I think until someone curates that vision, we need to give politicians and society like a gold, silver, bronze, right? Here's what you could have for this, here's what you get for that, and here's what you get for that. And then we can have a debate about whether HS2 is value for money or fibre to the home is value for money.
I think so. we're technologists, but the starting point for this to go, this is not a technology vision. It's a people vision. It's a society vision. It's a work vision. Technology is an enabler of this. So you don't start with the how, you start with the what and the why. So don't start by saying, well, we need to digitally enable schools. We need fiber to the home. We need every school to have gigabit connections. Everybody needs to have a laptop. There is no way you can validate that as a proposal unless you can link it to a higher value test or higher value function or a higher value outcome that you want to achieve. Now, if you say we want all children to be able to learn remotely from school, we want all children to be able to access education, high quality education, interactively from wherever they are, at whatever time they are from their home or when they're on the move, you start to get somewhere. If you start to then say we want all digital, all government services to be fully accessible remotely in real time without having to call centers, you start to get somewhere. If you then start to say, and final point, if you then start to say we want to support the concept of a common identity, and let's avoid ID cards and all the technical stuff. We want people to be able to log in securely using an accepted, token, whatever you want to call it, identity, and be able to transition across services seamlessly. Then you start to get somewhere, but it has to start with the people, and it has to start with what is it that you want as human outcomes. Oh, I see the videos drop, so I'll keep talking.
Yeah, keep going. Oh, I think we might have lost Gary. I will just give him a sec, see if he's coming back. But look, I couldn't agree more, Gary. And I think the real issue for us is we can't afford to boil the ocean with this either. And I think in the past, that's where we've always had problems. I'm just looking at there we go. Gary's just trying to reconnect. The challenge has always been that this ends up to be too big a problem. 3, 2, 1, you're back in the room, and it scares me when you start talking about identity, because I know and we know lots of people who have worked so hard for decades to try and solve that problem, and there are good solutions actually, and at some point we must get Jerry Fishenden, who I know has got a fantastic beam on what we need to do from identity. But in all of these things, it's like we never agree on the premise, and what I think is the opportunity now, as a result of the pandemic, we can get to a point where we can agree on the premise, and the premise is that every single citizen, active citizen, needs to be digitally enabled in some way, right? Not, there's a spectrum of how they're enabled, but it's a bit like things like the digital divide should not exist. Fix that shit. Excuse my French, but seriously, we should not be having a conversation about people who are economically excluded from being able to participate. If you have access but choose not to access, then that's a different conversation, right? But we should have that basic capability. And until somebody flips the switch and says, look, we are a bloody digital society, and as a result of that, I will make sure, in the same way that make sure that everybody has access to bloody water and electricity and all those sorts of things, then we've got a starting point where we can start to then tick off everything else as we start to go through.
Yeah, you can't have a debate about digital society without making it available, without ensuring and putting the safeguards that it's available to everybody. It has to be there. Technology has a cost. You start to do this. If you put that responsibility over to the service providers, you put it over to the technology providers, they're going to want to make money. What we need to do is to start, and this is why it needs to start with some very human and societal discussions about what we want to achieve. And this is how you can lock and build and lock in a framework that is actually going to be successful. And it is about having those really simple things. It's not about conversations about AI. It's not about conversations about digital identities. It's about saying, number one principle, this is available and this will be designed to everyone in the UK to make it accessible. So that means that we need to, let's look at children and learners. We need to make it, if you're involved if you're a learner in any capacity, the government is going to support you to stay connected. That's a very different one to, we need to have fiber to the home. Yeah. There's no point putting fiber to the home if there's nothing to use it for other than having a better Netflix connection.
But this is why I think if you took an approach which was about, and there is the report we talked about last week, which was the projection of skills in the workplace in 2030, right? So again, government department report. And we start to work back from there. So if that's the kind of workplace, and we have this theory that when people are in work, when they're contributing, when they are both offer value and are valued by the economy, good things happen, right? So the state gets some money, they're better in terms of healthcare, their reliance on the state is less, all of that stuff. So that's where we want to be. And it's meaningful work. It's not, I was going to say laying bricks, and I don't mean that in any way disrespectfully, but in the conversation we're having about robots and where do humans add more value, right? If that's our starting point and that's the kind of world we want, and I just think you start to extrapolate from there, and you extrapolate from there and you say, well, so what are the tools and what are the skills that we need access to in our society in order to make that happen? That's also where the other thing we talked about last week, which I think is really important, and I don't know how much they meant this to be the point, but the whole thing about lifelong learning, and we're doing it now as a result of the pandemic, but actually this sort of constant cycle of earning and learning, if you like, needs to be our default way of being. Forget digital by default, it's learning by default. And if we want a society that's able to learn by default, we'll get back to the point that you made last week, which is universities should no longer just be for students of a certain, part in their sort of career progression, or Monday to Friday 9 to 5. They should be 24/7 and open to every citizen. And maybe we're doing micro courses that may combine to create a degree. And then you go from HE and FE, and in FE we should be thinking about how do we train the human counterpart to Sam, the robot bricklayer. How are we going to build those skills? And so now I'm at HE and FE, and HE and FE don't have the skills, the digital skills they need. So now I'm back at secondary education and saying digital skills need to be crucial. So all I've done is I've started from the end result, which is a society where people offer value and are valued by society, and work backwards. Surely that's got to be, what we've got to do. The numbers are bloody out there. That's the thing.
I think one of the problems is that when we start to look at this, it's a common problem in business. What we do is we start to frame the economic argument. Well, first of all, there's an economic question to be asked. What it's going to cost, how much is going to pay it. And what we do is we frame the benefits of this, not just within the current definition, but within the current understanding and the current vision. So, so when you look at that, well, obviously, you want to put fibre to households. We want to make broadband widely accessible and not some rubbishy slow speed, seriously fast broadband. You need to then look at, if we then make education available, we start to open up a whole world of change. We start to think about it on a level of learning from one super basic 5-year-old literacy skills through to a 10 professor. What we do is we provide a ladder that people can move up. And education is a key thing on this, because education enables people to improve and work up the workforce. So I'm, loving this software at the moment, loving the technology.
Yeah,
so,
what's going on with you?
Can you hear me okay, Dave?
Yeah, no, audio's still good.
Okay, yeah, it's a technical thing with the software. So let's just finish. The thing we've got to realize, this is not about a particular audience. It isn't about a particular group. It's about providing this ladder for everybody to improve through education. I was talking to a colleague earlier on. I don't want to name him, but he transitioned in his 30s from a career in software to a career in law, and then transitioned back to software law. That journey needs to be made available to everybody. We need to start thinking, how can we start to make those transitions available? How can we start to allow people, use an old Microsoft phrase, to fulfill their potential? This is what it's about. And this is what, when we talk about the digital society, it isn't just learning. It's about enabling that ability to improve.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think, look, our kids are of a similar generation, if not a similar age. And their world is not going to be like ours was, where we spend decades in one place. They are going to move around, and the ability to move around. And actually, if you think about, again, this sort of rising tide of the machine, and I come back to my bricklaying robot, but there'll be an equivalent to that robot in the legal profession, in the accounting profession, in medicine, and it's a rising tide that lifts all boats. And the skills that light up the opportunity of that level of automation are actually the same skills. It's, skills like creativity and empathy and accountability, all the ones that we always talk about, curiosity, communication and collaboration. And so again, it comes back to, how do we give people, if we're in a world where we're more interested in the horizontal skills rather than the vertical sort of domains of expertise, how do we make sure that everybody has access to those such that they are free to progress and they are free to move and go to the industries where those resources are needed more than others?
Putting in the enablers opens up options. It doesn't take them away. One of the things we're seeing, and actually for a technologist, I think it's probably worth bringing out, well, a future means that a technology-enabled future means that we should only care about STEM learning. We should only care about science, technology, engineering, maths.
Yeah.
No, we shouldn't. We should be supporting geography, history, art, culture, musicians. That's what a society is. Yes, in any society, we need people to build some things. But once we build those things, we then need people who are going to create amazing experiences on top of those. So, and I think one of the things to do is when we start to talk about any technology is to bring this back to something very core at the start. The role of technology is to enable humans, full stop. That's it. That's what we care about. It isn't about technology for technology's sake. So broadband is a how. Wi-Fi is a how. 5G is a how. It's all, that conversation comes after. What is it you want to do with it? Not the other way around. We need to. And I think the other thing is, as you've said with the politicians, we need to widen this out to not be a technology discussion, but to be a human discussion and to take the technology out of it. Why do we take the technology out of it? Because as soon as we start to do that, people take them, as soon as it becomes a technology discussion, people take themselves out of that discussion because they feel they're not equipped to have a technology discussion. Whereas a parent who knows nothing about technology, who says, let's take an example of this. A parent who knows nothing about technology goes, if this happens again, I want my children to be able to learn from home.
Yeah.
I don't know how to set it up. I don't know how to make it secure. I want my children to be able to learn.
I really like that example. It's been one that I've been thinking a lot about this week, funnily enough. And I know we've ended up talking about education again, but I think that's kind of the point, isn't it? If you think about the number of parents who are worried about the experience that their kids had in the first two phases of lockdown, so the pre-Easter and the post-Easter, and they're talking about the lost 3 months. Now, that slightly bothers me because I don't think that's fair, but I get the concern. The place we've got to get to is where we have another one of these, or we actually see the opportunity that it is, we shouldn't be in a situation where we lose 3 months as a result of educating our kids remotely. We should either notice no difference, or we should be educating in a slightly different way. But we've got to give people the confidence in doing that. We've got to take them away from their position now, which is, well, that was a bit shit, through to actually done well. And done well doesn't necessarily mean to be this big transformational educational thing that we've talked about before. I mean, the number of schools now that are actively delivering lessons both to pupils in the classroom and pupils at home, because of things like, people waiting for tests and self-isolating and all that, is huge. And actually the experience isn't terrible, and that's I'm not selling it very well, but it's good. It could be better, but actually it's not bad. But we've got to get people in the mindset, and we've got to stop scaring people. And we can't talk about the 3 months that are lost, and we can't talk about the perils of Zoom calls and why we're all fatigued and all that sort of stuff. We need to reframe the conversation and start talking about, as a result of doing this, we were able to achieve these things. It's a bit like the other line that I've come back to. Going into lockdown, 95% of schools actively banned devices in classrooms. It was a miracle that we even were able to do anything as a result of that. Never mind the success that I think actually did happen but doesn't go reported. So now coming out of this, let's make sure that it's not 95% of schools actively banned, it's 99% of schools actively encouraged, because we found the way to make it work. Very long-winded way just to come back to your point, which is, unless we get the hearts and minds of the normal everyday people who really, unlike me and you, don't care about this stuff, they just want to get on with their lives, and I totally get that. But our job, and to all of you out there, the people who get this, who see this, it's our job to talk to the people, in our communities, to talk to the people at school, to engage with the people around us and say, do you know what, actually, we could make this quite good without much effort. We just have to do a few of these things. And then we've got to start to propagate that optimistic view. It doesn't have to be naively optimistic. It can be just pragmatic, but we've got to start to nudge people in the right direction. And it reminds me, I've got a new man crush, which sounds a bit scary. But Andy Haldane, I don't know if I can't even remember his bloody job, but he's somewhere in the Bank of England or something like that. I'm going to look him up while I'm talking, and he's bloody wonderful. So I came across him a while ago because he is the chief economist at the Bank of England, and I love him to bits because the first thing he did was a few years ago he hosted a conversation or facilitated a conversation about productivity, where he talked about productivity in a holistic sense. So our problem with how we measure what we're doing today is we only measure the bit of productivity we do that incurs financial value. So me loading the dishwasher doesn't count, but me working for a client does, right? Or anything that you do around the home doesn't count as productivity. Anything you do for a charity is a huge discrepancy. He was then also brilliantly in the news last week because he said, what can we just stop scaring the crap out of everybody? It's not helping. And he starts to create this, look, we're going to come through this. There are things we're going to do. And yes, there's going to be changes. And yes, there's going to be challenges. But this is what we're going to do about it. And I just think we just need more people like Andy Haldane, because they're the people that will guide us through this. And they're the people that actually they're in a position to help Boris and Keir and whoever is listening, not you, Farage, is actually to make all of this stuff happen.
Agree. I think the discussion around productivity is a really valued one. I think, when we put care into the equation, we start to do this. And this is when we go back to the people and we can start to go, well, hang on, I can't attend. We cannot escape the fact that everything anchors back to education. It does. It is about allowing people to get better. But escaping that for a second. It must not be technical. Every time we increase the technicality of something, we exclude people who should be leading this discussion. So, but when we start to look at this and go, well, I'm at home looking after the children, taking on a caring role, we start to think, well, you look at the productivity thing, you're excluded from those numbers, but you're excluded from a whole range of other things as well. And it's when we start to reevaluate this that we start to see the real benefits, because we start to see that person working from home is actually free a load of time that the university or the school or the college isn't open. But they want to learn. So it's about enabling them to learn. And we start to see again that these career choices, again picking up this bigger macro trend, the choices that people make don't become one A or B. They become, there's an infinite number of ways to reach where you want to reach. When I was at school, we were told it was O levels, GCSEs for the people under 40 or so watching, A levels, university, and that's the way to get a good job. Well, it isn't. There's a whole range of different routes.
Exactly.
But we need to be enabling those and having this conversation. And again, I think the main thing to do here is to make the future of technology a non-technology discussion. How do you get your strategy right? You start to ask really, really simple questions and encourage absolutely non-technical discussion in that dialogue. So what we saw in that Labour Party document was, we need to keep children safe. The internet can be scary, and we need to look after the impact of social media. Yeah, we do. Yeah. It's not a page one. My car goes really fast, but it needs bloody brakes. Yeah? You don't need to put the brakes in the brochure. Yeah. You're going to tell me it goes fast, but I'm looking at this and going, well, I'm assuming you do this. Why do we have really good brakes? Because the government mandates that brakes need to be in cars, and they need to be really good, and they need to work, and they need to be reliable and not stop working. And this is the relationship we need to have with the technology companies. Yes, you can do brilliant things, but there are responsibilities. But those responsibilities, cars can kill people, don't become a reason that you don't do the technology. And this is where, when you do look at the role of government, it's having this balance. It's not going, it's all great, but also it's not going, it's all bad.
but it means that you need people in senior enough positions that understand this, such that they can navigate their way through it. And I think that's the challenge: is you've got to put someone in that can look broadly across all of this, not necessarily be a technologist, but can see where the pieces are and where the pieces need to be. Because look, you and I both know that the tech companies have the answers, but they're the wrong people to be asking the questions. And I think it's about I was going to say leadership. It's not leadership, it's stewardship. And I would recommend that all of the major parties need someone who's right front and centre, looking left to right, about how digital can solve it. Back to this golden thread, right? Because all of the problems, all of the policy problems that you've just laid out in your conference, whether it was this week or the Labour Party a couple of weeks ago, there is this golden thread, and somebody needs to be pulling on that thread and looking at it and showing how we can solve some of the healthcare issues by doing this. We can solve some of the employment issues by, the example we had last week. Universities should not be worrying about digital skills in the new intake of students. They shouldn't. It's not their problem. That should be a problem for secondary schools. And so somebody needs to be in the right position to do it. And we're going to be here to help you. And actually, we're going to go, I don't know who you are, I don't know where you are, but we're going to come and find you. And if you're not scared by now, you should be.
There's two groups that are absolutely critical to this. One, young people, because we're building their future. So, don't be frightened of engaging 10-year-olds, because if they tell you the remote learning that you think is brilliant is rubbish, it's rubbish. It's not open to debate. If they don't think it's any good, it's rubbish. The second group, the most dangerous group you could ever involve in any consultation, mums. Get mums involved. Yeah? And what I mean by this is a group who are the backbone of the stewardship of the nation. This is the group who are dealing with getting the kids to school, holding the job down, running the house, looking after the grandma. This is, when you solve their problem, this is what you're getting right. Don't worry about the technologists. They'll go and fix it for themselves. They won't care about a load of other people, but they'll fix it for themselves. So go and fix the people who are the hub in this. Go and speak to community leaders and go and ask them not about what they want to do at a technology level, but what are the problems they have in that they would like to help, like in the future, to be solved. So a technology group, how can I easily find people who can help? How can I publicize what I'm doing locally?
Yeah.
Now, if you go to have a conversation with an SEO person, search optimization, you go and have it with a Facebook marketer, they'll tell you. But actually, we need to be making this more accessible to people. That's the conversation that happens. How do we have community involvement?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that's crucial, because this can't be about technology services. I think the highlight for me out of tonight's conversation from you, and you always give me one absolute gem, is that this can't be a technology thing. It has to be a social outcomes thing. It has to be a societal at a societal level. Somebody's got to curate that vision. Now, it needs to be informed by technology, but it isn't about the technology itself. And that's what we've got to build. And I think, we're going to have, I think, a number of these conversations. And it's funny, Gary said to me before we came on air, he says, what, so we're just winging it again, like we always do. And I take his point, right? But except for Gary and I, winging it is we've spent 30 years trying to do this. So, it's not quite as unplanned as it may appear to you. But we've always struggled to make stuff happen. And I think, and I'm not just talking about just Gary and I think technologists, and now is the time for us to activate and come forward, and that's what we're going to come back to. I'm going to pause there because I think we've done enough for tonight. We're going to come back to digital society and a national strategy time and time again, and you'll see that this golden thread is going to take us to skills. It's going to take us back into the world of work in terms of the skills, what's happening right now, how organizations are dealing with what's going on in terms of the changing culture, the change in whether we're remote or not. It's going to take us back into education, and it's going to take us right to the core of what we can do. So thanks again, Gary, for joining us. Always a pleasure. Sorry about your internet problems. The future will be televised. It's just going to be slightly buffered, I think, is how that's going to play out.
Cheers, Dave. Thank you.
Brilliant. So listen, thanks again for joining us. Thanks for giving us your Wednesday evening. We've got an interesting show for you next week. We're going to be talking to the author of this fabulous book, which is Leadership by Algorithm. And that's going to be coming to you next week. So that should be good. As always, we hope you enjoyed it. I know it's tough. I know it's autumn. The nights are getting dark, but we'd love it if we could get a like if you've enjoyed it. Subscription if you haven't already subscribed. And as always, we'd love to hear from you. If you think we could do better, if you think we're blowing smoke, that's all good. We may ignore you, but it'd be nice to know. And we will see you all next week for another show. Thanks for coming in. See you.
There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioners' future. This is just one of them.